Hello and welcome. Thank you for joining us today for our presentation of Reimagining, Returning the Lost Ornaments to Robert Adams' Table at the Metropolitan Museum of Art. I'm Jody Hanson, and I'll be joined by conservator Nick Pedemonti. Nick's going to be starting us off with some background about the piece and talk about his work on the conservation treatment.
A virtual hello to everyone, and thank you for joining us. This is Nick, and as Jody just said, I'm going to give a brief introduction to the table's history, followed by a quick look at the concept for its conservation treatment, its overall design approach, and its mounting. The subject of our talk is a large council table with a very heavy green marble top. It was designed by Scottish architect Robert Adam in 1765 for the gallery at Croom Court, which is located in Worcestershire, England, and the country seat of George William, the 6th Earl of Coventry. It was carved by Adams' associate, Sephirin Alkin, and painted, quote, 4 times dead stone color, according to surviving bills by its painter, Charles Aylmer. Dead stone color historically referred to a matte off-white color. There were 2 tables and 2 mirrors made for the gallery, as we see in the historic photograph at left and the underlying drawing by Robert Adam. We can see where they were to be located in the room. As the story goes, eventually in 1948, Croom Court sold the pair of tables to the Philadelphia Museum of Art. In 1960, the Met purchased the remaining pair of mirrors, and in 1965, the 2 museums made an exchange, 1 table for 1 mirror, thereby enabling each institution to present the corresponding table and mirror together. When first viewing the table, the space below the apron seems to be missing something. Upon closer examination, we can see there is remaining wood and adhesive covered with layers of finish, clearly suggesting a past applied decorative ornament that has now been lost. Unfortunately, we don't know when the ornaments were lost. We were actually more concerned with what was lost. Luckily, we have an idea. In 1765, Adam had made a design for a table at Syon House, and scholars believe this drawing was the basis for the 2 tables created at Croom Court, partly because he was in contract with both houses. With this design in hand, around 2015-2016, the team at the PMA worked to reinterpret and reproduce the lost ornaments on their sister table. This effort was led by conservator Baru Salim-Najad and curator Donna Corbin, and their success greatly informed and inspired our subsequent work at the Met in 2019. The 3 primary sources that we used for designing the new ornament reproductions were 1. Robert Adams' drawing for Syon House. 2. The details already present in Alkin's carving, both on the table's frame as well on its accompanying mirror. And 3. From the skills and virtuosity brought to the project by professional carver Carol Halle, whose interpretations were discussed, reviewed, and approved by Met curators and conservators involved in the project. The drawings served to give us a sense of the ornament's dimensions and the overall balance of design. We looked closely at how Adam used negative space and how the drops and swags related to each other. We then looked closer at Alkin's interpretation of Adams' design on the table itself, noting specifically how Alkin rendered the drops flanking the women's heads, taking note of their profiles and the veining in the leaves. The scroll work was a little more challenging since the table did not contain any comparable designs. We instead looked to the mirror's lower section for reference. The anthemion at center matched closely with the anthemion in Adams' design. A miniature approximation was ultimately what we aimed to achieve in the new ornament.
Here you can see before and after photos of the table with and without the ornaments. This is not a typical mount making application since we were remaking the hanging components and had the ability to build in the latch points or embedded connectors. By approaching the project together from the beginning, we were able to design and prototype, and I think the end result benefited greatly from this exchange of ideas.
Our goal in mounting was to set the ornaments flush against the bottom of the apron, like they had originally been, without seeing the mounts and without attaching anything directly to the table. Echoing Jody, we successfully managed to work through each hurdle to find the best solution through a collaborative effort that both benefited our work and the table. The collaboration was drawn out in a series of steps. First, a thorough measuring and survey of the table's many dimensions was done to determine the total number of ornaments, their placement, and the requisite dimensions. Then we determined the mounting needs for each individual mount. I made this outline for Jody so she knew exactly what type of mount to make for what side and for what ornament. Enlisted here are the abbreviations I used for each mount shape and the list of mounts needed for each section with the corresponding section's frame measurements that she'd be working with. The guide and marshaled list of mounts enabled us to work with a clear vision and mitigated what could have been a fairly confusing system. And through all this, we would create many prototypes to test the mounting logistics and adjust to or improve the designs. Once we thoroughly fleshed out the mounting needs in their initial designs, I began work on the ornament production, molding, casting, and preparation as Jody worked to create and install the mounting frame and various custom bracket attachments. As you will see, it became quite an undertaking. This will be a fairly quick how it's made tour of the ornaments reproduction. It began with Carol carving several prototypes that eventually led us to her 3 master ornaments. Here you can see the progression from left to right of the central enthemion, its references, its prototypes, and its final design and execution. She carved each master from basswood, each representing the primary ornaments, the scrollwork, the drop, and the swag. From Carol's 3 wood masters, I would reproduce the requisite 22 ornaments, each cast in epoxy. To do so, a customized box was made to take a mold of Carol's masters. The carvings were taped to the bottom and sealed with wax for easy demolding. A silicone rubber molding material was brush applied to reduce the chance of forming air bubbles against the ornaments. Then the remaining mold material was poured atop. Before each casting, the mold negative was dusted with talc powder to facilitate the cast ornament's removal, and a wire armature was fitted in the mold's negative space to add flexural strength to an otherwise brittle epoxy. We use a 15-minute setting epoxy, mixed and poured into the mold. After about 30 to 45 minutes, the cast would be removed. It was during the casting stage we identified the opportunity for embedding the brackets in the casts. For the swag mounts, each end received either an L bracket or a rod. These custom rods allowed the mount to circumnavigate the original carving or glue block, outlined here in red. For the scroll work, we developed an M-shaped mount, although we didn't start there. At first, I thought we could drill into the cast and attach the mounts where we needed, but I realized this wasn't necessary since we could embed the mounts. One of our early prototypes was embedding 3 small L brackets in the scrollwork, but doing so actually created more work for Jody since these 3 would each require a corresponding bracket to attach to, and we didn't need so much adjustability for one ornament. I wanted to anchor the ornament at 3 points without increasing Jody's workload, therefore, our design led us to creating what we called the M bracket, where the 3 attachment points remained embedded, but these were anchored to a flat stock at back and therefore only needed 1 anchoring bracket on the frame's interior. By committing to embedding the mounts, we needed to perfect our designs before I could cast the final ornaments. At this stage, our collaborative effort began in earnest while prototyping the right mount for each ornament. We'd remake those we found ineffective and refined our designs through trial and error until we created the near-perfect match and fit. For those that were good, but needed minor changes, we made those adjustments accordingly. As a treatment note, each final cast ornament was trimmed of excess epoxy. Any final adjustments to the ornament's dimensions were done at this point also, and then the new ornaments were painted to match the table's decorative finish, followed soon after by Jody's installation.
As indicated by the white arrows, there was a small gap between the top of the legs and the underside of the table. This space provided a ledge upon which we could rest a 3/16 inch thick by 1 inch wide strap of metal. I milled the corner connections with the lap joint configuration so the bar rested flush. Initially we started with brass throughout, but found that there was deflection across the longer spans. Some sections were replaced with a stainless steel bar that provided more rigidity. A mylar barrier was slipped between the bars and the table, and polysuede was also used as a barrier for the mounting brackets. It was beneficial to try a few different bracket types by prototyping them. This allowed us to determine the correct thickness of metal to use and different possible types of connections. It was important to create a system that would allow for small and simple adjustments. Without this adjustability, we would have either a standard bracket that was ill-fitting or else upwards of 45 custom brackets. So we designed a mount matrix that offered spatial movement in the X, Y, and Z axis. With each mount bracket, we incorporated up and down range of adjustment by stacking central washers or spacers, and this is indicated by the green arrows. You can see that the connection of the mounting bracket to the brass or steel bar has a spacer that can be stacked to the height necessary. Side-to-side motion was possible through a slot connection, and this is indicated by the red arrows. You can see that I milled a slot that allows us to shift left or right and then tighten the position with a 632 machine screw. A small slot connection was also used for back-to-front shifting and this is indicated by the yellow. That's a much smaller machine screw. A few of our embedded connectors were rods, and for this bracket receiver, I used a square tube with a small set nut, and this is indicated by the blue. This allowed also for back-to-front adjustment. Each mount component was stamped with a number that corresponded to the table dimension survey. While the pattern basically repeated 9 times, within that sequence, there were many custom bracket details. It was imperative to keep the components labeled for both our sanity as well as to aid future installers. Working together during the trial fitting, each mounting bracket was placed and marked. Then the metal bars were removed in order to drill and tap the connection hole for a 632 machine screw. As you can see from our process photos, I am fortunate to be short enough to sit and work underneath the table. From time to time, it's beneficial to be 5'1". There are a few thoughts we wanted to leave you with at the close of our presentation. Collaboration and brainstorming being a really key part, super helpful for this project. Also, it's unlikely you're going to knock it out of the park on the first try. So the prototyping is key for figuring out your joining methods and thicknesses of metal and how those connectors work. In our case, adding in a great variety of adjustability made the fine-tuning pretty easy.
I agree with Jody's remarks. I felt that clarifying what the project's goals were at such an early stage allowed us to brainstorm more creatively, and it gave us extra time to prototype as I worked out the casting procedures. It was a truly fruitful collaboration as we actively bounced ideas back and forth until we were all satisfied. It is worth underscoring at this point the value of our expanded circle of collaborators, including my supervisor Mecca Baumeister, who played an important role at every stage, facilitating the project's initiation, overseeing its treatment with always constructive input and a critical eye. Our team of consultants, with Baruz's multiple visits, and the aesthetic, historical, and display perspectives shared from our Met curators Danielle and Wolf. Jody and I were both hired specifically for the British Gallery renovation project, and the Atom Table was one of our main projects among a plethora of other exciting objects and initiatives. In the end, truth be told, we couldn't be more happy with the results as we installed the table and its mirror in the new British galleries and put on its finishing touches.
It was our pleasure to share this project with you. A number of people helped along the way and deserve recognition for their contributions.
That is amazing. It's so fun to watch each one of these presentations. Thank you, Jody and Nick. Now it's time for questions. We've got a short question and answer period, and I'm going to pass this off to Sam.
Thank you, Jamie. Hi, Jody and Rick. That was amazing. I just can't, Nick, sorry. It's amazing. Just so great. So good to hear about early collaboration. It's so essential, isn't it? I just think that that's just the key, isn't it, to success? But yeah, I just want to compliment you for a complicated project with incredibly innovative solutions. So well done. We've got a couple of questions here. So the first one is, were the cast pieces rigid, or did you use a semi-rigid material to slightly change the arc radius of the swags?
Nick, are you on?
Oh yeah, I'm here. For the swags, there was some flex in it. They had a wire embedded in them, so I could adjust it. So even if the cast itself was just quite brittle, if it snapped or broke, it would still hold itself together. So there's 3 essentially dimensions that the cast swags needed to fit into. We had Carol carve essentially the middle or the larger dimension, and I was able to adjust the size of the swags. So luckily they were brittle, so that's why we needed the wire input, but they were also adjustable because of that. So we were able to sort of change the dimensions and then install them accordingly.
Thanks, Nick. The next question is, why did you choose to cast the final product in epoxy, and were there other materials you had considered?
We were taking our lead essentially from Baruz's work at the PMA. He had done a lot of testing on all of the epoxies, and he found the greatest success using the Alumilite system. And so rather than reinventing the wheel, we essentially adopted his methodology. Another alternative could have been carving all of them, which of course, there's the challenge of, the wood itself was extremely brittle. So Carol's carving masters had snapped and broken multiple times. So we knew that that wasn't going to be a possibility. And so I think the epoxy also had a pretty good color match. So it wasn't so challenging or difficult to match the colors to the table itself. Because I think all the working properties, the use of the materials, the embedding the wire, I think all of that kind of suited our purposes and our needs. And maybe if we had more time, we could have tested things ourselves, but that wasn't necessarily the case.
Yep, no, a great solution. There's another question here from Jason that says, were the metal bars resting on top of the legs on the interior of the table?
Yes, there was a slot there, and I don't know why the table was fabricated that way, but they were able to fit into that space between the very top of the legs and the underside of the stone. It fit this natural 3/16 inch space with a little bit of the barrier a tolerance as well. So they just rest.
Great, thank you. And I've got a question for you. Because it was just so complicated, do you want to both talk about what was the greatest challenge for you and how did you overcome it?
Oh, gosh.
If there was just one that you could pick.
Well, I think one of our struggles was just the material thickness. As mount makers, we're always trying to make everything as thin and unnoticeable as possible. And so, I had a couple different brackets that were a lighter weight brass, and those didn't work out for us. They didn't offer the rigidity that we needed. We wanted them to be a little movable in case somebody bumped into them, they wouldn't break off. But we didn't want them to be so, so it's a balance of rigid, not too rigid.
Yep. And what about for you, Nick? Was there anything in particular?
For me, it was sort of the figuring out how we're going to have all of the ornaments flush against the bottom. And I think the solution came about from when Jody and I were essentially sort of figuring out how to do that. And I think once we did the embedding, which made sense once we actually started, doing the work, that definitely solved that issue. But I didn't want there to be too much mounting if that was possible. But then we ended up trying to minimize it as much as possible. But I think it was to get the aesthetic that we wanted to achieve. It required this level of customization, and the product is what we ended up with.
And if I could also add, we were working on a lot of other things at the same time. So it's not like we were totally just on this project. I mean, there were so many other parts of the British Gallery project that you're bouncing back and forth all the time, like with so many installations.
It was kind of good. It was kind of good that it worked out that way, because we could sort of take sort of mental breaks and come back to it and keep revising it. And we worked on it over maybe the course of about a year.
Yeah. Wow. Thank you both. We've run out of time, but yeah, thank you both and congratulations. I'm going to hand back over to Jamie. Thanks.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Well, thank you, Sam, for taking care of the questions. Thank you, Jody and Nick. It was so cool to see that. I love the bringing together of conservation and mount making to do that kind of, a repair, a presentation, bringing something back up to where people can really understand it.